Right, so the grammatical structures that I want to teach you today are the ones you have on the screen. Used to and would, used in the past, and also to be used to and to get used to. These are very versatile and they're ideal for any situation and for any speaking or writing exam that you have to face. So let's start with this situation. You have a lady on the screen, and her in year 2000, it says she travel a lot, but now she doesn't travel. Okay, so if we had to fill in the gap, you should say something like, okay, in year 2000, she used to travel a lot, but now she doesn't travel anymore. Okay, so Diane doesn't travel much these days because she's retired and she prefers to stay at home. But she, in the past, she used to travel a lot and she used to go away 2 or 3 times a month. So when we use used to, it means that she used to travel a lot. So she traveled a lot regularly in the past, but now she doesn't do it anymore. Okay, so that's the meaning of the structure used to. Let me show you a couple of examples. So again, it's something that happened regularly in the past, but no longer happens. So if we look at the examples on the screen, tell me, for number one, what is the missing information? You could say, I tennis a lot, but I don't play very often now. So there you go. We need to say, I used to play tennis a lot. That's in the past, but now I don't play very often. The second example, David, a lot of money on clothes, but these days he can't afford it. Again, we should be using used to spend because it's something that he did in the past many, many times, but he no longer does it. All right? Okay, so the question is used to present or past? Okay, do we use it for the present or do we use it for the past? Well, the answer is, if you say something like, I used to walk to work when I was 20, used to is always used for the past, to express the past. So what about the present tense? What's the present tense of used to? What do we say in English? Can we say, I used to go to the gym twice a week? So for example, if you're a Spanish speaker, if you want to say, yo suelo ir al gimnasio 2 veces en semana, is this correct? The answer is no, it isn't. Because the present tense of used to is simply usually or the tense in the present tense. So if you need to say, yo suelo ir al gimnasio, you need to say, I usually go to the gym twice a week, or even the present tense on its own. I go to the gym twice a week. Okay? Now, what about questions? How do we form a question with the structure used to? Okay, for the question, you need to follow this structure. Did, the subject, and used to, but pay attention because that used to doesn't have the final D because you have the past auxiliary did at the beginning. So if you need to say something like, oye, ¿tú solías comer caramelos de pequeño? O solía ella estudiar francés cuando estaba en el instituto? You could say, did you used to eat sweets as a child? Or did she used to study French when she was at high school? But pay attention because it's a very typical mistake to write the D at the end of used to, but that is wrong, okay? In questions, you don't use the D at the end because you are using did at the beginning of the question, all right? Now, let's analyze now what types of verb are we going to see on the screen. So for example, the sentence, I used to sleep for 8 hours, but now I only sleep 6. Now the verb sleep, would you say it's a repeated action verb or is it a permanent state verb? So the answer is it's a repeated action. So the verb to sleep is an action verb. It's a movement verb. So it's something that you can do for some time and it implies some action, okay? It's not permanent and it doesn't stay like that forever. Let me show you another example. I hardly recognized Alan because he used to have a beard. Okay, so in the past, Alan had a beard. Now, if you think about the verb to have is a repeated action verb or is it a permanent state verb? To have a beard is simply a state. You have it or you don't have it, but it's not a movement or an action verb, okay? An action verb would be, for example, to shave the beard, but not to have it. So in this case, have is a state, okay? Let's take a look at another example. I no longer like coffee, but I used to like it before. So the verb to like something, is it a repeated action verb or is it like a state? When we like something, it doesn't imply any action or any movement. It's simply a state. I like chocolate. I don't like reggae music. Okay, it's something that stays the same, at least for a long time. So that's why we would say like is a state. All right. One final example. When I lived in France as a child, we used to have croissants for breakfast. Now, to have croissants, which means to eat croissants, that's a repeated action. It's an action verb because to have something or to eat something is not a state, but something that requires some movement and some action. So why are we seeing this? Because the difference between an action verb and a state verb is essential for our next structure. Okay, so bear this in mind. With used to, we can use it for any type of verb. It's okay for repeated actions. For example, she used to make cookies at Christmas when she was younger. So to make cookies is an action verb, but used to is also correct for permanent states. So for example, she used to own a pair of shiny black shoes in 5th grade. So to own a pair of shoes or to have a pair of shoes is simply a state. It's not really an action verb. So with any type of verb, used to is correct. But now here comes the difference. For example, we can say Diane used to travel a lot a few years ago, okay? But this is a bit plain and a bit boring for level B2. If we want to just make a difference and, boost our grammar a little bit, there is another structure, which is Diane would travel a lot a few years ago. Now, don't get confused with would and conditional, okay? Would is the typical conditional word to make conditional sentences, okay? If I were you, I would go to the doctor. But this is completely different. This is just a synonym for used to. So the meaning is the same. Diane solía viajar mucho hace unos años. So the verb travel is an action verb, right? Okay, it implies movement, it's not a state. So with action verbs, with repeated action verbs, we can use both. We can use used to travel, but also we can use would. She would travel a lot a few years ago, and the meaning is exactly the same. But the effect or the result that you obtain is much, much better because would is more sophisticated and I highly recommend it whenever you have the chance, okay? So a quick recap. If we have our past repeated action like he used to run 20 miles every week when he was young, okay? The question is, can we say he would run 20 miles a week when he was young? The answer is yes, you can. Why? Because the verb run is an action verb. And action verbs are okay with used to and would. Now, let's take a look at another example. So, he used to be very thin in the past, okay? Is a non-action verb. To be thin is simply a state, a permanent state. So, can we say he would be very thin when he was young? The answer is no, you can't, because be, to be thin, to be tall, to be attractive, okay? It's a state and it's not an action verb. That's why the only possibility here is to say he used to be very thin, all right? He would be very thin is incorrect. All right, so a quick summary for you. Used to is valid for everything, for action verbs and non-action verbs. However, would is only valid for action verbs. Now let's take a look at a few examples. What you can see on the screen is this lady, Karen, 5 years ago on the left and today on the right. And the idea is that we need to make sentences using the expressions used to, would, or didn't used to. Okay? So for example, let's take the example already done. So you can say, okay, Karen used to travel a lot, but she doesn't go away much these days. So the idea is that you pick one sentence from the left and one sentence from the right that makes sense, all right? In this case, because travel is an action verb, you can say both. You can say she used to or she would travel a lot, okay? Because it's an action verb. Now, let's take a look at another example. For instance, let's look at the I am a hotel receptionist. Now, with that one, we can say she used to be a hotel receptionist, but now she works in a bookshop, okay? So obviously, used to is the only correct answer because to be a hotel receptionist is a state, is not a verb of action. That's why would here is not possible. Okay, let's take a look at the next example with play the piano. Can you tell me what it is? The right answer for play the piano is she used to or she would play the piano, but now she hasn't played the piano for years, okay? Here, because play is an action verb, it involves movement and action, therefore both are correct, would and used to. Now let's take a look at a negative example. And the example is, I never read newspapers. Okay, so we could say, all right, so she didn't used to read newspapers if we want to make it in the negative, but now she reads a newspaper every day. So here in this example, we have used to in the negative, which is, remember, didn't used to with no final D at the end. Now, another negative example, I don't drink tea. You could say she didn't used to drink tea, but she likes it now. Now, be careful because with would is not very common to use it in the negative. That's why the only possible choice is she didn't used to drink tea, but not she wouldn't drink tea, okay? Because would is more specific for affirmative sentences. Let's do a last one. I've got a dog. So in this case, because to have a dog is a state, you could say only she used to have a dog, but her dog died 2 years ago. Over here, the example with wouldn't be correct because to have a dog is a state and is not an action verb. All right, so now let's have a look at the next grammatical structure or the next couple of structures, which are to be used to and to get used to. They're a bit similar, but not exactly identical. Let's take a look. So for example, you see this lady on the screen and she's fast asleep on her bed and the TV is on. So if we had to make a sentence with be used to plus ing, that's the structure, we could say something like, I'm used to sleeping with the TV on because the noise in the background doesn't bother me and I sleep better. Okay, so in this case, the lady could say, I am used to sleeping with the TV on. All right. Now, the meaning for this, to be used to sleeping with the TV on, there are two options and you need to choose the right meaning. Does it mean to talk about things that we are accustomed to doing or a new situation which is now familiar? Or do we use it to talk about a new situation which is becoming familiar? Okay, so the secret here is are we already familiar with the new situation or are we becoming familiar? Is it still in progress? So what do you think? Is option 1 or option 2? The right answer is option 1. So we say to be used to sleeping or to be used to plus ing when we are talking about things that we are accustomed to doing or a new situation is already now familiar. All right? Now let's take a look at this other man. He's on the bed and his cat is on top of him. He doesn't look very happy, I'm afraid. So if we had to make a sentence with get used to plus ing, you could say, I am getting used to sleeping with my cat on my bed, but he takes all the space and I can't move, okay? So this structure, the meaning again for the structure get used to something or get used to doing something is to talk about a situation that, is becoming familiar. It's still in progress. Do you think the man has a successful result or is it still in progress? The answer is that it's still becoming familiar. He's not accustomed to it. He's in progress. That's why we need to say, I am getting used to sleeping with my cat, but I'm still not there. So the similarity between to be used to and to get used to is quite similar to these examples. For example, it's not the same to say it's late than it's getting late, right? If you say it's late, it means that it's already late, okay? But if you say it's getting late, it means that it's becoming late. It's beginning to be late. The same thing with I'm sleepy. If you say, oh, I'm sleepy right now, you already are sleepy. But if you say, I'm getting sleepy, it means that you are becoming a little bit sleeping. You are in progress, all right? The same thing happens with I am used to waking up early. It means I have the results now. I am used to that. But if you say I am getting used to waking up early, you're still not there. It's still in progress, all right? So the sentence is on the left, it means that it's done, okay? You have the result already. However, the ones on the right, it means that it's still in progress, okay? It's the same thing. So now, I want you to practice with me and I want you to look at these sentences and it's time for you to make full sentences using these prompts, okay? So for example, how would you finish this sentence? I would like you to take a piece of paper and write down how you would end these sentences with these structures, okay? I'm gonna give you a few minutes. Okay, so you can pause the video now, take your notebook and write them down, and I'm gonna show you now some samples, all right? Let's go. Okay, so here are some sample answers for you so that you understand the structures better. For example, with usually you could say, I usually drink coffee before starting work. Otherwise, I can't concentrate. So this is something that you normally do every day. So suelo tomar café y ese suelo, acuérdate que no decimos I used to have coffee, but instead I usually have coffee, all right? Now the second example is I used to live in a small town, but now I live in a big city. So this is the contrast between the past and the present, which is very different, all right? Now, if you want to say I am used to, you could say something like, okay, now I am used to speaking English every day at work, so it feels natural to me. So now you are accustomed, you are familiar with this situation, and you can say, estoy ya acostumbrada a hablar inglés todos los días en el trabajo. So this is something that it's done for me, okay? It's not in progress. However, the negative, you could say, I'm not used to waking up early. I still feel exhausted in the mornings. So this is the negative. You don't have the result yet. Todavía no estoy acostumbrada, ¿vale? A levantarme temprano, okay? That's why we use the structure with be used to in the negative, okay? Now, if you want to finish the sentence, it's difficult to get used to, you could say something like, it's difficult to get used to waking up at 6 every day, especially in winter. So here, there is something that you're not familiar with yet. You're still in progress. Es difícil acostumbrarse a levantarse temprano por las mañanas. So it's difficult to get used to waking up at 6 every day. So remember, you need the ing at the end, okay? Now, if you want to say yo no solía hacer algo, you can say I didn't used to like vegetables when I was a child, but now I eat them almost every day. So here is basically used to in the negative. So we say I didn't used to, okay, with no D at the end. And the final example, when I was younger, I would spend hours reading adventure books under the covers with a flashlight. Here is an example of an action verb, which is to spend hours reading. To spend time, to spend money is an action verb. That's why we could say would. You could also say used to, but would is much, much better. It's more sophisticated and it's more top level, okay? So I highly recommend using would for past repeated actions in the past, of course. So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope it's useful for you. Let's keep on practicing. See you in the next video. Bye.